Okay, what we're going to do in this particular segment is look at children, yes or no, but more in terms of, well, what if I don't want a child and I'm pregnant? What can somebody do? So we're looking at unwanted children from the perspective about, I have a reason why I can't have this child. How do I not have it? So we're looking at abortions, we're looking at adoptions. And then we're going to look at the other side, would be those families who want children but can't have them for one reason or another. And we'll look at technology and how has that been helping families have children and at what kind of cost. All right, so let's get on with this one. Enjoy the second part of children, yes or no. Now, when we consider unwanted children, it's not to be seen as, I don't want that child. It's more about there are circumstances by which a woman may choose that she can't have this child. And we're going to look at them. There are some pregnancies of both single and married individuals that are unwanted. A pregnant woman has three options currently: abortion, adoption, or they can raise the child themselves. And until the mid-70s, few choices were available for unmarried pregnant women. Medical, legal, and social changes have brought more choices to women today. In adoption, legal rights and responsibilities are transferred from the birth parent to adoptive parents. Moms who make this choice are offered various degrees of openness in the adoption. And openness just means varying degrees of relationship and connection with their birth child. Usually the decision to give a child up for adoption is extremely painful for the birth mother. Now, foster homes, on the other hand, are natural homes or a substitute home, which is kind of a natural environment in varying degrees of openness and visitation as well in this example. Or you can raise the child by yourself. And there's a stigma attached for those who do not raise their own biological children. Many children who were unplanned and initially unwanted eventually became much loved. Gay and lesbian families have had difficulty adopting children, and unwanted children who was raised by a parent is at risk of physical or emotional abuse. So when we think in terms of unwanted, we have to get past just thinking of people do not want children just because they don't like children. That's just not as straightforward as that. When we hear about and talk about abortion, an abortion is a medical terminology termination of a pregnancy. And in Canada, abortions have been legal under certain circumstances since 1969 and with no restrictions since 1988. Allowed throughout all 9 months of pregnancy. The number of abortions have decreased slowly in recent years, and the greater access to contraceptives results in fewer unwanted pregnancies and therefore fewer abortions. The number of abortions in Canada have decreased slowly in recent years. You see that in the table in the top right-hand corner. It's also in your text. History of abortion rights in Canada you'll find in your text as well, table 5.1. Like other aspects of reproduction, abortion has raised many questions. When human life is presumed to begin? Whose life is to have priority, the woman or the fetus? Does a woman have a right to control her own reproductive system? And how late should an abortion be permitted? Now, if you go to YouTube and search "You're Not in Her Shoes," you'll find a YouTube video that's an interesting way to sort of look at and describe the issue of abortion in terms of the stigma that can be associated between pro-life and pro-choice, and the labeling that each can do. It's an American-based Planned Parenthood video, but it's an interesting 1.5-minute video looking at the stigma that it gets attached with the labeling and who should be making this choice but the women themselves. Now, there are some other strategies that can be used in terms of understanding the quality or what's going on within the baby, and amniocentesis is an example of you can take a sample of the fluid in the embryonic sac, which will give some information about the health of the baby, which for some women aids in their decision. Now, there are some examples in some cultures of female feticide, and this is the practice of aborting the female fetus as a practice, not because of any issue that might be of a woman's issue. This happens in some parts of India and some parts of China by the millions, but also happens in North America in numbers large enough to distort the male to female ratio in some ethnic groups. Infanticide is in the Canadian Criminal Code. A female person commits infanticide, when she causes the death of her newborn child. Rare and in extreme cases, often occurs after mothers have tried to conceal their pregnancies. Now, carrying further, again, following up on foster care and adoption, the foster care is a provision of care by a family other than the parent or guardian of the child, and it's approved and arranged by the child welfare authorities. And the trend in foster care is now away from baby care and long-term placements. Advances in medical science mean Canadian children are unlikely to be orphaned. With improvements in benefits for single parents, children are less likely to enter foster care because of extreme poverty. They're more likely to be in foster care because of behavioral problems or victims of neglect and abuse. Adoption, unlike foster care, is a legal transfer of parental rights and obligations from a birth parent to an adoptive parent. Once parental rights have been terminated, biological parents cannot regain custody. Now, there are more than one type of adoption. There's an open adoption where there's the birth parents and the adoptive parents will know each other and exchange information, and the closed adoption where the biological and adoptive parents know little or nothing about each other. Records are often sealed, preventing children from tracing his or her roots, preventing birth parents from knowing what became of their child. The Aboriginal custom adoption is a privately arranged adoption between two families within an Aboriginal community. The goal is to ensure that Aboriginal children are raised in Aboriginal families to retain their language and cultural identities. Now, there is some stigma that's attached to those who do not raise their own biological children. The notion of adoption being second best makes some adoptive parents feel that they're not fully entitled to the child that they are raising. Emphasis on blood ties and genetic heritage have also underlied some of the recent flood of adoptees seeking contact with their birth parents. Now, as mentioned earlier, you could raise the child on your own. It's almost impossible to know the number of abortions, adoptions, foster care, but why? Well, children in a family assumed to be wanted and maybe not. Married women do have abortions and do place their children with families, but in spite of that stigma, many unplanned children are well loved. I know, and probably you know, families who have had children that they didn't plan. They're as loved as any other child that they have or would have had. Many unmarried mothers choose this. Does help our awareness of unwanted children. Both men and women raising children by themselves by choice is on the increase. Men raising children by themselves is one of the largest growing family types in Canada right now. So what is known? Unwanted child raised by a parent is at risk for physical and emotional abuse and many other risks to be discussed later in the semester. So what if you want a child but you can't have a child? What are your options? Well, there's all sorts of new technologies that can be used. Involuntary childlessness, this is where infertile couples may have a sense of being defective, which reduces their overall sense of worth. Usually women feel that a lack of children more than men because of the social pressure and the psychological effects. The medical investigation is intrusive and can be pretty uncomfortable. There are some options for parenthood other than if foster care and adoption aren't what they want and they want a child of their own, then there are reproductive technologies. These include artificial insemination, host wombs, surrogates, surrogate mothers, and in vitro fertilization. Artificial insemination, or AI, is the practice of using sperm from a donor to fertilize an egg. The donor sperm is used when the husband is infertile and carries a genetic disorder, or can carry a genetic disorder. It's also used for unmarried women who wish to have children. Now, a surrogate mother is a woman who agrees to be artificially inseminated, usually for a fee, with a view to turning over the resulting child to the biological father and his wife. And since 2004, surrogacy in Canada has been regulated by the Assisted Human Reproduction Act. And in Canada, the Assisted Human Reproduction Act was introduced in 2004 to regulate this issue. You'll see on page 148, and might begin to wonder, do other countries adhere to the same guidelines? In vitro fertilization, or IVF, is a technique for fertilizing a woman's eggs with her partner's sperm in a lab dish, and later placing the embryo in her uterus. Procedures usually are used when fallopian tubes leading to the woman's ovaries are blocked. In 1978, the first test tube baby born in England, Louise Brown, that's the woman in the bottom right-hand corner who has her own naturally raised child there. One cycle of IVF costs between $7,750 and $12,250. It's expensive. With advances in DNA technology, possibly test embryos for sex and inherited disease and health will be something will be done in the near future. As technology advances, moral and ethical questions are going to arise. So what are some of the issues with technology we need to consider? You might be wondering, well then, if I use some technology, who's the parent? The intentional mother and the intentional father, genetic mother, genetic father, gestational mother, nurturing mother and father? Will we be going down the path of selecting babies, making selection and designer babies? Some of the issues that is how much money that it costs. It's very costly to use the technology. How enforceable are contracts? There's been many examples of contracts drawn up with, or no contracts drawn up with surrogate mothers who choose later, before the pregnancy is complete, to keep the child, not give the child up. So there's been numerous issues there around who's the parent then, and should we go down the path of being able to design our babies with selected genetic material? As the technology advances, moral and ethical questions will arise. Is it right to allow better off people to have children and deny them to the poor? Will children with lower incomes become the provider rather than the recipient of such services? Reports that clinics in developing countries provide surrogacy services at lower costs. Do surrogate mothers truly understand what they are agreeing to? Is it legal to use sperm or an egg taken from a comatose or dead individuals? Well, it's being done. It's not whether or not you can do it. It can be done. It's whether or not we should, and whose rights are being respected or not respected in that instance. How long should frozen embryos be kept? What should be done with embryos if the prospective parents both die? What happens if a couple divorces and one ex-partner no longer wishes to have a child? Should IVF be available for women over 55? Should prospective parents be tested to determine whether they are qualified to raise a child? There are a lot of questions that will arise with the use of technology. What you're seeing here is what's in your textbook, but it's the Assisted Human Reproductive Act about what can and cannot be done in Canada currently. Now that's not up to date. It is up to date as of 2004, I believe. Germline therapy is substituting healthy genes for unhealthy genes to prevent a disorder or to pass on healthy genes, just in case you're wondering what gene line therapy was. All right, there we go. Babies or not. It's not as simple as maybe you thought. It's a little more complicated, isn't it? Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed. Good luck and keep up the good work, and we'll see you next week. Bye now.